Hello, everybody. If you need my help spotting open spots like spaces, I could maybe help from here. First of all, I want to thank you all for being here. If I were you, I would be in a happy hour somewhere. So thank you for making the effort, and I'll try to make it up for you. I don't have any alcohol, but try to make it interesting. At least I know that Gary, Matt, and I will do our best. So, and also I don't see you at all because the floodlights are blinding here. So I'm going to trust that you're there, but if you're not, that's also fine. So my name is Raviv. My day job is, I tend to describe it as I'm a cat herder, or if you want, chaos coordinator, which translates to the fact that I own product strategy for all of the things that have Defender or Sentinel in their name in the threat protection team, which there's a lot of them. I think the latest count has been 12 Defenders. It keeps growing. I don't know. You just turn around. There's another one. And my job is to try to get all of them to somehow go in a single direction, which, like cats, it doesn't always work. So I'll try to tell you my sad story in the next 45 minutes of where we're kind of going. I'm not going to mention any product names here at all because it's not interesting, but I will try to narrate the Uber story of what we think about when we think about the next thing in protection. Also, this is a very complex with a lot of facets. So I'm going to focus on a couple of things that I think are more important, and then Gary and Matt will join me on stage, and we're going to talk about some AI things, and hopefully it will be interesting for everybody. I want to start by telling my story, which is in the past couple of years, Microsoft's always been this big organization with a huge target painted on its back. Everybody's at us. Mostly nation states, by the way, but everybody's at us. And for the most part, you don't hear about that because hopefully we're successful at thwarting most of these attacks, and sometimes it's more complex than needed, and it gets to the news. And if you've read the news in the last couple of years, there's been two major things that came out of Microsoft in terms of in this eternal battle between us and the nation states. And sometimes, most of the time we win, sometimes they win. There are some learnings out of that, and I want to share with you two of those and what we're doing with those. So the first learning that kind of came out of that is that there is always a gap between what we think we have and how we think we secure it and how we think our policies actually reach, the furthest corner of our organization and what that means, and are we monitoring everything and are securing everything. And there's a gap there. And the attackers are really good at finding that gap and exploiting it. So if you think of, say, I'll pick on one of the big attacks on Microsoft in the recent years. Microsoft has several corporate tenants, but it has a range of what we call satellite tenants. And those are tenants that were built for demos that employees have built in order to develop things outside in testing of various things that we have. And the sheer amount of those tenants that are actually not fully monitored by the security team and nobody actually completely registers them and knows what they are is humongous. We're talking not in the thousands, we're talking in the tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of these tenants. So the shadow IT and the things that lurk out there that you don't really see are your weak spot, and you don't see it. And we're going to talk about what we're going to do with that. The second thing that really emerged out of that is as a result of that, if the attacker has a better map of your org than you're screwed. And in recent years, it's become harder and harder for us inside Microsoft, because our network is so complex and big, to actually say that we have a good map of our org. And not having a good map of our org means that even if you see the attacker, you don't fully understand where they're going, what they're after, or where they came from. And that is a serious deficiency we have to solve. We cannot sit in front of the CISO and ask, what are they doing in the storage account? How did they get here? What's in the storage account? And can they use it? And what would be their next step? The other thing that was really clear is that both sides were using AI extensively. We were using AI extensively to try to understand what they're doing and fight them, and they were using AI. And it's not using AI in the sense that you think like the, because the new Anthropic attack, sophisticated, let's corrupt the models and use the agents in our favor. No, it's the simple stuff. It's like crunching the data that you get out of the organization that you're attacking in order to create that map, and to create that map faster than the defenders can reason about what you're doing. That's the advantage for them. So they were doing it, and we were doing it. And that is like the new reality, and we gotta adapt to that new reality where the speed of things is expedited not just because they automate or the AI is, it's just the rate of discovery and reuse. The time from getting credentials to actually using them somewhere has really dropped significantly. And we need to rethink how we defend in this world. So like, how do we get to the next level? So the first thing we need to realize is that, as my good friend John Lambert says, the attackers think in graph. I know Microsoft says that a lot, but it's still true. There's the other thing that he said, which people tend to forget, because I think that phrase was coined 2016, and everybody's using it. Attacker thinks in graph, defender thinks in list. Yes, but the other thing that he said, as long as that asymmetry continues, the attackers will always win. That part is often dropped, but is really important. So we need to create the maps of our org, and we need to understand how the attackers are traversing these maps. And to create the map and to understand the traversal of the map, we also need to do the other thing, which is like we need to make sure that all our silos are somehow connected. We cannot continue to look at endpoint as endpoint, and identity as identity, and email as email, and apps as apps, and network as network. We have to connect the signals because that's the map that the attacker is building, and therefore that's the map that we are building. And modern attacks just go all across. If like 5 years ago it was all endpoint attacks, now it's cross-modality attacks that start somewhere in apps and end in the cloud, or start in the cloud and end in the apps, or start on the endpoint and end in the cloud. They're all traversing. If you want to look at like where the attackers are going to go, look at the segregation that you've built between your tenants. That's where they're going to jump, because that's the thing that they're looking for. And identity is, by the way, the linchpin that helps them do it. So we've spent the better of like the last 2 years trying to actually build that graph. And it's a process, and we're not really there, but we're progressing on that. So some of these things are already out there, and some of these things aren't. Also, there is no one monolith graph. It's a complex thing. The graph of the state of your org, which reflects all your assets that you have and who owns them, what vulnerabilities are on them, what configuration do they have, and what policies apply on them, that's one graph. But if I want to overlay that, like the path the attacker can take and the actual attacker actions and the traffic that happens, that's a whole new complex graph, volume-wise, complexity-wise, like different things. And all of these things also have versioning, so you need to move back and forward in time to kind of understand how your graph evolves over time. So it's a complex thing. I want to just spend just a sec to talk about the definitions. So the graph is essentially all the assets that you have. Those would be the nodes and the resources. The connections between them, the edges, are the possibilities of traversing across from one resource to the other. It's the relationship between the resources. You need to know on this graph, much like any other map, you need to know where the interesting places are. This graph is big and complex. Trying to look at it is confusing. What are the key points? Think about as destinations that the attackers are going for. Those would be your critical assets. And it's important, we'll get back to why critical assets are really, really important, but you got to understand what the critical assets are. Some of it we are trying to help in like identify those. Some of them are obvious. Your domain controller is clearly a critical asset, your critical business service, those are critical assets. Sometimes it's the things that you don't know, or it's the choke points, or it's the interesting intersections that the attackers will have to go through. And then there's attack path and blast radius. Attack path, all the paths that the attacker can take to get to your critical assets. And blast radius is the sad truth where the attacker's already in, and they're standing on a resource, and the CISO asks, where are they going? That's the blast radius. So when we talk about this graph, I kind of liken it to a map. So think about your favorite map provider, Bing, Google, Waze, whatever. You have these layers in the map. You start from the terrain, the lay of the land, and then you overlay it with the streets and the houses, and then you overlay it with the actual destinations and the paths you would take in order to navigate to that destination. So similarly, you need to get this security layer well. You need the inventory of all your assets. You need to understand the path of the attack. You need to enrich it and understand where things are either happening because there's threat intel saying that they're coming, or there's threat intel enriching it to say it's interesting, or threat intel says this is exposed because there's TTPs that will affect it. And at the end, the top layer is the things that are actually happening, the incidents, the attacks as they actually unroll. If you do a good job at addressing all these layers in the graph, we can actually do some interesting things with graphs. So we can start from, we can actually attack our own network. You can red team or purple team or tabletop or use agents to do that. That will help you discover attack paths. There are, by the way, other ways, simpler ways of looking at attack paths. All the attacks that already happen on your org are actual attack paths. There's some ways of calculating attack paths, like we can definitely help in terms of like look at threats and like how would that threats map to attack path. But if you think about it, these are not necessarily TTPs, it's the connection, it's the sequencing of those things on your graph. If you look at hunting, we can hunt on the graph. Because now we could develop a new language to say, it's not just like I'm looking for a specific behavior that could be suspicious and then try to see, I can actually look at individual paths going to interesting places, and I ask myself to scrutinize who's actually going there. There's some interesting thing that our own internal security team is doing, where they're looking at the different services running on Azure, and then they're saying, what is the normal pattern of communication between those services? Anything that's abnormal, they go look at. And surprisingly, it's oftentimes, these are like attacks that we haven't seen. So you could use the graph to go and hunt. We can investigate the attack on the graph because, again, the things you do once you have a graph running, you would say, I'm seeing somebody here. Let's plot the graph back to see where they came from because I need to plug that initial entry point, right? I want to nip it in the bud instead of like, where does it come from? It can't happen again. Also, you want to know the downstream thing because this is where you're going to have to react. So all your response and automation and all of these things need to happen downstream if you want to stop the attack. So we can investigate. We could use this to harden. One of the nice things that, again, the CTO for our own security team wants to do is he says, if we can actually change the terrain while we go, that's a great thing to do to kind of thwart the attack. Because if you can surprise the attacker by the terrain changing, and you say, well, that's like, science fiction. But we did that with memory, right? We did ASLR in memory, where we're scrambling the memory so attackers can do that. Can we actually do it in the way our assets are organized? So our systems are not built that way, but if we can get to that future, that could be super interesting, and then we can contain, and then we can protect. So that's like why I'm super happy with like the announcements of the past 6 months when people announced like the Sentinel platform, which is the underlying platform we use for Sentinel and Defender. I was happy about that. And the focus was on the lake, which is great because like low-cost storage is awesome, and we're all security people, so we're hoarders, and we want more data at a lower price point. Well, that's all great. With you 100%. I actually got excited by something else. I got excited by the layer on top of that. Because the layer on top of that means that what I do is I can take all of this data, and then I can create inventories. And inventories are really key to having a good map. Because if you don't understand that my identity in Entra, in the corporate, and my identity in Salesforce, and my identity in Dropbox are the same identity and the same person, then my map is bad. Again, advantage attacker. They're not confined by compliance and regulatory things and like what they can and cannot do. They can deduce everything and they can run everything. And they don't see these boundaries. And we need to understand these connections. So inventories are crucial. If I don't understand that this device seen from Intune and this device seen from Defender for Endpoint and this device seen for Entra is the exact same device with different GUIDs, again, I've lost because I don't think there's a connection there, but there is an edge. It's actually the same resource completely. So inventories and clean inventories are really, really key, and we're doing, I think, endpoint for a while now. We just announced this week the revamped identity inventory, in which we're enabling the connection between Entra identity inventory, and Okta, and Ping, and SaaS apps, and they're all kind of merged into one. This is the basis for the graph, so I'm super happy about that. And then on the layer on top of that, we always had the tabular stuff. There's the graph stuff. And there's the vector DB for AI, because it turns out that when you marry AI and graph, interesting things start to happen, and I'll show you in a sec. So I'm excited about that, because I think that's like the new knowledge layer and our ability to actually go build the graphs. If you want to play with graphs, and you've got Defender today, under the tab for exposure management, you've got like your asset graph. Go look at that. If you're an Azure subscriber, there's something called the Azure Resource Graph, which I think is open for everybody, and if it isn't, don't beat me. But I think it is, which has the graph of all your resources on Azure. So these are like the two first things that we're showing you that we've done at scale. And now the Sentinel platform allows us to build the graph, and we're building it. So let's meet here next year, and we'll talk about the graph that I could actually give you that represents the entirety as much as possible of your org. So let's say we built the graph, okay? And by the way, an important part of the graph is opening that graph to everything. It's not just Microsoft. Nobody has a network that's only protected by Microsoft, not even Microsoft. So it's all about connecting all the signals from everywhere into that graph. So how do I take the third-party signal and marry it into the graph? Sentinel. Well, that's how I do it. There are other ways of doing it as well. I think we announced the Sentinel store, like the security store today, which means that other vendors can connect to the graph. It means that you could get agents to run on that graph. Like, the graph is the heart of the whole thing. So here are a couple of exciting examples of what we're doing with it now that it's there, okay? First internally, and then available to you guys. One, critical assets. The key with critical assets is we've been doing posture for a long time, all of us. In the cloud, shift left, code to cloud, patch management, all of these things. The common thing about all of them is that at the end, essentially, the thing with this is it's long list of things that we need to do, prioritized. So I'll pick on patching. The average enterprise, there's like more than 10,000 things on that list at any given time. And yes, it's prioritized by CVSS and business context and whatever, and you patch the top 100. It's just sad that the attackers are not following the top 100 list. So the whole thing is broken, like we're boiling the ocean. So here's a new idea. Let's just look at the critical assets, because of all of these nodes in your graph, your critical assets are roughly 1%. And then the thing that we'll do is we look at those critical assets, and we'll identify all the attack paths going into these critical assets. And yes, there's an infinite number of attack paths, but to the critical assets, that is scaled down number. And the other interesting thing is if I want to break an attack path that's going to the critical asset, I don't have to go and immunize or fix all of these nodes. I just need to sever one edge. Pick the one that's easiest to sever. Take it out, that attack path is gone. And then rinse and repeat. That is a scaled down problem, and that's why I'm excited about let's do that on the graph for posture. And it's part of the things that we're doing, and by the way, AI is going to help us to do that. Another example is like the whole exposure math, right? So if you kind of extrapolate that, like look at the way we're doing it, it's all about understanding your critical assets, it's all about understanding which attack paths are open to the critical assets, and then closing them, and that is the new measure I want to have, as measuring the state of my exposure. So we're on it as well. Here's another thing we're doing, which is, we call this attack disruption. Actually, it's been live inside of the Defender suite for 2 years now, maybe 3. And the idea here is that I used to play a lot of video games when I was a kid, which was a long time ago. But I still do. But now I play like 9-year-old games with my daughter. So I played Doom. Everybody here knows what Doom is? Okay, great. So I played Doom. And I get a feeling every time we do this thing that we're playing the first level of Doom, and the attacker is already playing at the boss level. We're looking at the alerts, and we're trying to fix them like a machine, like, oh, something popped up here, let's do something about that. Oh, I blocked it, great. Did we win? No. So we got to elevate. So the next phase was like, can we actually plot the graph of what the attacker is actually doing across all modalities as they progress? And if we could do that in real time, so this is like, all the vendors are doing it now, right? This is incidents, cases, whatever you want to call it. Great. If we can plot it in real time, we can actually intervene. So what the hell is going on here beyond the individual alerts? Where are they going and what are they doing? What type of attack is it? So 3 years into this, I feel we're doing great. It's for 5% of the attacks, but it's the important 5%. So if you're having a ransomware attack, a human-operated ransomware attack, if you're having a back attack, if you're having an adversary in the middle attack, if you're having hands-on keyboard inside of your org, we're actually getting better at seeing these chains and blocking them. So like 3 years ago, I would say our rate of blocking for ransomware was somewhere around 13%. It wasn't just us, everybody. Now, on good days, we get to like high 80s. And don't quote any of my numbers because it's snake oil, because you know, like we do something and then they do something, and like next to that tomorrow it will fall down to 60, and then we'll get back to 80, and then we'll fall back to 60 again. It doesn't matter. The thing is, like, we actually feel that we are able to do something proactively to stop it. And the way it operates is just we track the graph in real time. When we get to 99.9% confidence something bad's happening, we just aggressively go do that. So if you've got Defender today, we're doing it for you. There is no on-off switch. It's a lie, there is an on-off switch. But it's on by default. Okay, and we're actually doing it for those attacks, and my plan is to do it for more and more. I want to get from 5% to 80%. It's a dream, but that's where I want to go. So this is called attack disruption, and the interesting thing you'll see here, this attack took 1.5 hours between the initial entry to actual mass encryption. And the interesting number to look at is the 400 thing. So again, think about the SOC. I could like churn all these alerts out of the SOC. The attacker tried 400 times in a sequence to do this. Like, would your SOC react to that in time? I don't think so. Our SOC couldn't. So this is like where automation has to happen if you want to do that. Another thing that we're doing for a while here, and by the way, we're also using the information to the graph to understand what the critical assets are. So if we're trying to disrupt something and we know it's going, next step is domain controller, we're not going to isolate the domain controller, because then they win either way. So you really have to understand where you're going down that path, and you need to have the right tools to do it. Right? And if the attacker decides to move from Entra into AWS, we need to follow suit into AWS, and we need the tools to go and do something in AWS, which is another thing we just announced today. And we have, for example, for business email compromise, we have a cooperation with SAP, because we know that at the end of the day, those business email compromises are going to lead to a transaction in SAP, where money is going to get transferred. So how do we pass the signal out to SAP to say, look, you need to hit pause here. Something bad's probably happening. Somebody needs to go look at that. How do we get the signal from SAP that we can actually look at that signal to say, actually, this is really happening, yes or no? How do we get to that 99.9% confidence? So there's a lot of things in motion here, but I'm just showing you kind of where we're going with the graph. Predictive shielding, there's two sides for it. One is like, I'm trying to understand downstream from me at the graph what my blast radius is and what I can do to actually get shields up to prevent the attack from prolonging. What do I sever? What do I block? What connections don't I allow in order to get this attack to stop? What do I contain? And the other side of it is I also want to go back. So I want to go back on that graph and say, let's look at all the forensics that happened before I detected it on that graph. And then realizing, which is the next level of the game, that the fact that I stopped this attack doesn't mean that they gave up. It means I stopped this chain. Are they still in my network? For sure. Are they trying a different way to get in? For sure. So now let's use the graph to go back. Let's collect all the evidence that we saw, add that to the detections, and go ask ourselves proactively, where is it? Why don't I see it? Where else in my org are they? And if it's the graph, I can actually build a graph query to say that sequence of events on that graph, show me all other places in my org that have the same sequence, even if it's not malicious. And then let's go hunt. And again, here's another anecdotal thing for you. Our internal security org has shifted its own kind of a security team to a motion where you used to have a lot of SOC people and a few hunters. Now there's the same amount of hunters as there are SOC people. I would say there's more hunters than SOC people right now. And they're just like constantly hunting inside of the network to see where the attackers are. Because it's not a question if they are there. They are there. So it's kind of a mind shift on like how you do these things. So this is called predictive shielding. And again, some parts of it is already kind of in production and running in your systems. And some of it are things that we're still working on the back end. And I'm doing kind of a shift to Gen AI because I want to talk about agents for a bit. Stole this from Satya. There are 3 types of agents, basically, that you need if you want to frame the whole agentic AI thing. There are 3 types of agents out there. One is what we call assistive agents. So think of it as humans are working, and the Gen AI is trying to help them. Copilot is an assistive agent. The problem with Copilot is it's an assistive agent, but it has no context. It doesn't see what you're doing. You have to tell it something that you want it to do, and based on what you wrote, it needs to understand what the context is and try to help you. That should shift. We are moving to a world in which they work together. Anybody here vibe coding? No one? It's a shame. You should all be vibe coding. Base44.com. After this session, go have a look. Sorry for like advertising other people's platforms. Go to security. Yeah, go to Copilot Studio and do that as well. I'm just starting with the easy stuff for you. But the nice thing about vibe coding is you're coding in the IDE, and the AI is coding with you. Like you're telling the AI what you want to do, and you're both working in the portal. It's coding, you're responding to it. It's coding, you're responding to it. You're coding, it's responding to you. That's the world we should go with assistive agents. We want to create this like joint experience in which the agent sees what you're doing. And you can kind of say, look, oh, I see that you've clicked these things, therefore I understand your intent is to actually go do this. Did you know that? And offer you advice or help. You don't have to describe what you want. You could just say, we're looking at this, help me. And it can click in the same way that you can click. The human-led engines is like when we talk about things like everybody here heard about the fish triage agent, the other SOC agents that we just announced, great. If not, you could go look that up. It's also true for all the other vendors. I'm going to put it into a class or a bucket for you. Those you should think of as like your digital colleagues. It's the virtual humans on your team that AI is going to help with. You delegate a task to it, it will do its best to help you, and then it will come back when that task is over. So I'm going to delegate a part of the queue to it. And the wrong way to think about it is like automation. These are not automation agents. They are like your colleagues, which you're going to have to teach them what you want them to do. They would going to have to learn. You're not going to scrutinize everything that you do. You're going to create trust between you and them that they're doing what you need to do, and then you're going to let them go, and they need to come back with questions. We're not there yet, but that's kind of the journey we're on. And the last one is like teams of these things working in parallel and back-end agents that are doing this work. And in the world of the SOC, this is going to be everywhere. And there's an interesting question, which we're going to talk about in a second, which is, can AI actually not just take jobs away? Can it actually teach? Because one of the problems we have is like when we start using AI, we don't learn. I build an AI that will write an NL to KQL for me. It will write it. Have I learned KQL out of that? No. Can I actually, if I haven't learned KQL, scrutinize what it just did to know that the joins were stupid? No. So we're actually losing trade to AI. We're not gaining trade. And that's probably wrong, and we should do something about that. And I think we'll talk about that in a second. And at the end of the day, you're going to see a lot of Gen AI agents coming out of Microsoft. And there's like the first batch is already there. But essentially, think of it as doing the 2 things I've said. It's going to have to augment our work and help us. and it's going to have to be sort of the way that we can delegate work. It's like parts of our team. If anybody here has seen the Agent 365 announcement in Ignite, that's kind of what you think about it. It's members of your team that are just virtual agents. And you're going to have to govern them, and you're going to have to control them. OK. So I want to invite Gary and Matt. Thank you, Caroline. So welcome. Good to have you here.
Good to be here.
I'll let you introduce yourselves.
Gary Berletti, Deputy Global CISO, KPMG. Work with Matt and a great team of helping to protect KPMG systems, KPMG data, client data.
Yeah, hi, I'm Matt Graham. So I work as part of our global SOC. So my role is really to look at how we modernize our SOC, either through improving our current capabilities or introducing new technology into our stack.
So I have 3 questions for you guys in the time we have left. So the first one is kind of in KPMG, how would you describe kind of your journey into the world of like AI and AI in the SOC, and like what's your experience with that?
As it relates to the organization, KPMG has really leaned into AI. As it relates to the security program, you can see AI reflected when you look at the 3 dimensions of protecting our AI systems and protecting from the threats of AI, and then using AI to enable our program. It also is very much focused on those existing threats that have been amplified as a result of AI, the rise of the importance around data security and data posture management, and also thinking about the insider risk and how that's changed as we talk about agents.
Yeah, from my point of view, with a SOC lens on, and before I get onto AI, we've really been heavily invested in kind of automation after, over a number of years. I see this as the next iteration. So, our workflows in our SOC at the moment are around the 60% mark. From our point of view, we need to actually invest in AI to actually move that dial forward. So, our focus this year from a program point of view is introducing agentic AI. We already did Copilot, so we've already had that generative experience with our analysts. And that's given them that kind of guided hunting or guided instant experience that has really benefited us. From our analysts' point of view, we've also through automation and Defender, we've actually enabled auto isolation. So you talked about attack disruption, predictive shielding rather. We've already been around 50% of all of our devices, and I'm talking about MDE here, are auto isolated in under 120 seconds. And the only reason we've had to do that is really to give our analysts the opportunity to investigate and reduce that blast radius. But as you said, that's very linear and point to point at the moment from what we've just seen, what you presented.
Yeah.
But I think that's also reflective. If you look at our security strategy, I mean, like you talked about with the disruption, the speed is critical, right? Everything has changed as far as the time from when there's a vulnerability to an exploit and the lateral movement. You described it in minutes up there. And so that's reflected throughout. And leveraging the Microsoft stack is helping us in that space. Also doing some proof of concept work with some startups and understanding where there's these novel opportunities to do something a little bit different and augment what we have.
So I heard like you said AI for enrichment, so more to like my assistive agent story, AI for automation, AI for response.
Yeah, so that's one of our key use cases at the moment. So in our operating model, a lot of the response is down to the IT teams or in our case, the member firms. So what we want to be able to do is actually bring AI into it to actually assist them into making actionable decisions. Because at the moment, in like most SOCs, we hand over a lot of information and they've got to try and synthesize through that and make a decision. So we need to be empowering them to make that decision.
So in that, like, how do you think about kind of especially in the cases of like automation or even response? Like, can you trust the AI to actually do its job? And then like, what controls do you put in place to?
So this is my opinion. So I'm not fully into the full autonomous AI.
Yeah.
You know, I think there still needs to be human oversight. And from our point of view, our journey is we do have that human in the loop. So AI will take us so far, help us, you know, go through vast amounts of data, add some context to these incidents. But what we can't do is it can't always bring that contextual information because that can be in so many different places.
So the humans are still in control at the end.
Yeah, they've got to have the accountability.
Yeah.
One of the things that we're exploring is giving the organizational context to the agents. So, you know, using our playbooks and using our tools and our sites of information so that grounding it with that information hopefully will help to reduce some of that.
So the more we train the AI, the less mistakes it will make.
Yeah.
Essentially. Which kind of leads me to the second slightly controversial question. So I talk to a lot of CISOs, and one of the repetitive things I hear is, oh yeah, so we're going to automate with the AI. So things like, we're going to get rid of all our tier 1 and tier 2 because the AI is just going to take care of that. And also I don't need all my juniors, and I'll just keep the senior security engineers and then use them. But my question is then, like, where are all these senior engineers going to come from if you don't have juniors?
Yeah,
So,
I don't think you're replacing them. To your point, I think you're changing the whole dynamic, and you know, having the juniors collaborate with the agents, have the juniors maybe even be trained by the agents, and really look at the talent management program so that we make sure that the juniors understand what's going on and can become those seniors. I use the analogy when people were programming years ago with assembly, and so now people doing modern application development, they don't have to know how to do assembly programming, right?
Yeah, from my point of view, you know, it's not going to replace juniors. What we're basically doing is it can augment them. You've got to look at it that, you know, it's giving them a competitive capability, an advantage, because like you say, we're competing. You've already gone through about half the attack paths. So, you know, this is about amplifying their capabilities and strength. And, you know, one of my feedbacks from today was you gave the KQL analogy, and to be honest, you know, KQL can be complex, so an analyst still has to be able to validate that output. So going back to your first point about the seniors, it's going to be more of a burden on the senior staff to be able to mentor and support the junior analysts.
The KQL example really rings true for me in the sense that we're trying to create an LLM model that will take natural language and, you know, spew out of the other, black box spew out the other end some complex KQL query. But like as humans, we don't write KQL like that. Like we write something, and when we validate it, and then we add another thing, and then we add a join, and then we add another join, and like we do it in stages, and I don't see why like we mandate the AI to go from A to Z in one go. Like do it in stages, which will make it more explainable and also reduce the number of mistakes happening. But like people are just expecting it to just solve the problem. I don't think it's going to happen anytime soon. And on the junior thing, another interesting thing I heard is that sometimes like you expect the AI to make things faster, but it's an analogy from coding. So when you're like a seasoned developer and you see the AI trying to code something, you already know what the pitfalls are because you've seen code before and you know where the places where likely any developer is going to fail, and you kind of know how to react to it. So you see the AI doing the mistake, you already know what the mistake is and how to fix it. If you're a junior, you don't see that. So for a senior, AI is saving time, but for a junior, AI might take them on a ride through like a very long, elaborated process, which they don't understand how they got there. Think about it like a SOC. I would try to do an investigation, and then I would spend like a senior would just look at that and say, no, leave that. That's like the wrong direction. Like it's not going that way. The junior might like just stay on it because the AI is taking them some magic trip through, you know, the logs of something. So I think like we've not figured it out, and I agree with you. I think like the seniors' role is really going to change in the sense that you gotta train the juniors, like, and you gotta use the AI to do that, and you gotta make them critical of what the AI is doing.
But I also see that the seniors are going to be in more demand. So obviously, when it comes to, we are the same as most security teams. Trying to attract talent, the seniors' demand's going to go up.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's gonna get interesting. Okay. Last question for you guys. Like in your journey, what would be your, do's and don'ts that you wanna share with the folks here?
I mean, one of the things, we see how things are changing so quickly, so it's going to be hard to plan for something that you're implementing to go more than a year, because whether it's the threat landscape, the technology, leapfrogging itself, it's not like you can plan something out and say, this is what I'm going to do for the next 5 years.
So the rate of change.
Tremendous,
Yeah.
yeah.
I think for me, mine are mainly don'ts. Don't ignore speed. Like you said, things are getting faster, so we need to, enable the teams to be able to react to speed. We've got to be able to compete. Also, don't treat AI as a one-time implementation. I can, as with things like content management, seam tuning, you're going to need new skills in the team. Things like AI engineers. Who's going to be maintaining the agents from the security plane?
I was just going to say, going back to what you were saying before, we got to make sure that it's not just people using AI and getting lost in that journey, right? So trying to have some objectives of how it's used, think about the expected outcomes, and also measurements will be very important too. So how do we measure the effectiveness of?
Yeah, if I had to add one thing, I would say like we need to create more channels of sharing. Like I think all companies out there are doing something with AI, and something succeeds and something don't. Like we need to fail fast, but we also need to kind of spread and share how to do, what the best practices are. Like we need to get better at that for sure. Thank you.
Thank you.
It was a pleasure having you here.
Thanks for having
Thank you very much.